Philosophers, dramatists, theologians have grappled with this question for centuries. What makes people go wrong?
What makes good people do bad things? You think you know yourself. You think you'd never cross the line. But under the right conditions, could you? One man didn't just ask this question, he built a world to test it. And in the process, he became part of the very thing he was trying to understand. Philip Zimbardo was born into a world that didn't play fair. In the South Bronx, survival wasn't about being good or bad. It was about adapting to the world around you. He saw it happen over and over. Friends he grew up with, bright, full of life, slowly changed. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. It wasn't long before he realized, the people in power decided who won and who lost. The rich had lawyers, the poor had prison cells, the lucky had futures, the unlucky didn't. It didn't matter if you were a good person. It didn't matter if you had dreams. The world made its own rules. The realization started when he was 5. Double pneumonia left him trapped in a hospital bed for months, his body weak, his mind sharp. But it didn't matter, because his life was no longer his own. He was no longer Philip. He was just a patient, just another body in a system that decided whether he lived or died. It was the same thing he had seen in the Bronx: power, control, the ones who had it, the ones who didn't. And so, years later, when he had the chance to study the human mind, there was never a question. For Zimbardo, psychology wasn't just about research. It was about understanding the very thing that shaped his life. In 1961, he learns about the research of a psychologist named Stanley Milgram. This psychologist asks a chilling question: would ordinary people follow orders, even if it meant hurting others? The experiment was simple. Volunteers were told to deliver electric shocks to a stranger. The shocks weren't real, but they didn't know that. Milgram's results were disturbing. Even the most ordinary people followed orders, willing to inflict pain simply because someone in authority told them to. But what if it wasn't about orders? What if, instead of being told to do something, people chose to do it?
165 volt. Time.
By 1971, Philip Zimbardo wasn't just studying human nature. He was ready to test it, to push it to its limits. For years, he had been obsessed with one question: what makes ordinary people commit extraordinary cruelty? Is it their personality, or is it the system they're placed in? Stanley Milgram had already shown that people would obey authority, even when it meant harming others. But Zimbardo wanted to go further. He didn't just want to observe obedience. He wanted to create a situation where people weren't just following orders, but making their own choices. If power could corrupt, how quickly would it happen? If good people were placed in a system that rewarded cruelty, would they resist, or would they become something else? To find out, he designed a study unlike anything seen before. The idea was simple: a prison simulation, 2 weeks, volunteers, no real violence, just a test of how quickly people adapt to roles. 24 mentally stable college students, carefully screened, half assigned as prisoners, half as guards. A coin flip would decide who held power and who had none. The experiment began with an illusion. The prisoners were arrested in their homes, handcuffed by real officers, and taken to a makeshift prison in the Stanford basement. Their identities were stripped away, replaced by numbers. The guards, given uniforms, sunglasses, and full control. A simple setup, an academic study, nothing more. But human nature doesn't work that way. People don't just pretend for long. Now, they become. By the second day, the prisoners had started to resist. It was minor at first, ignoring orders, talking back. The guards responded with small punishments, push-ups, extra chores. But then, the prisoners barricaded themselves in their cells. That was the turning point. The guards with no real authority had two choices: let it slide or escalate. They escalated. Within hours, punishments became real. Forced exercises, sleep deprivation, verbal degradation. They controlled meals, toilet breaks, even light. It was a psychological war, and it was working. The prisoners stopped fighting back. They became submissive. The guards became more aggressive. Soon the experiment wasn't an experiment anymore. It was real.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
But the real shift wasn't with the students. It was with Zimbardo himself. He had started as an observer, a researcher, watching from the outside, but now he was inside. He had given himself a role, the prison warden. When a prisoner begged to leave, Zimbardo didn't see a student anymore. He saw an inmate, a troublemaker, someone who had to learn discipline. He denied the request. The scientist was gone, the warden had taken his place, and for 6 days, no one questioned it. This wasn't just an experiment in human behavior. This was a transformation, a system where good people, ordinary, stable, intelligent people, had lost themselves completely. And he was one of them. On the 6th day, the experiment was shut down, not because it had failed, but because it had worked too well. In 2004, the world saw something it wasn't supposed to see. The image came from Abu Ghraib, a US military prison in Iraq, and it wasn't the only one. Torture, humiliation, dehumanization, and it wasn't happening in secret. It was being documented, photographed. The guards were proud of it. When the photos leaked, the world was outraged. Military officials called it an isolated incident, a few bad soldiers, acting on their own, rogue behavior. Philip Zimbardo saw something else. Because to him, this wasn't new. This wasn't surprising. It was familiar. Too familiar. This was his experiment, but it wasn't happening in a lab anymore. It was happening in real life. The abuses at Abu Ghraib weren't random acts of cruelty. They were part of something bigger. The soldiers at Abu Ghraib weren't just acting on impulse. They were following a system designed to break prisoners, to control them, to strip them of identity. And the methods? They came from research, psychological research by Philip Zimbardo. The Stanford Prison Experiment had been studied by military psychologists. The same theories Zimbardo had tested, how ordinary people become monsters under the right conditions, had become a blueprint for interrogation methods. The same blueprint used in Abu Ghraib. He had spent decades trying to understand evil, but now, his work wasn't just explaining it, it was being used to create it. Maybe it wasn't his fault, maybe this would have happened anyway, maybe he had only exposed a truth that was already there. He had always said it wasn't about bad people, just bad systems. But what if that idea, the very idea he had spent his life promoting, had been used as an excuse? For years he had asked, what makes people do terrible things? Now he had to ask something else. Did I just explain evil, or did I help create it? He spent years lecturing about the Lucifer Effect, about how environments shape behavior, about how easily good people can be manipulated into doing terrible things. But the more he spoke, the more he noticed something troubling. People weren't asking how to prevent it. They were accepting it. It's just human nature, they said. That's how the world works. And that's when Zimbardo realized the real danger. His work wasn't just exposing how evil happens. It was making people believe it was inevitable. People weren't looking for solutions. They were giving up. And for the first time, Zimbardo asked himself a question he had never considered before. If a system could turn good people into monsters, could it also turn them into something else? History remembers the monsters, the ones who followed orders, the ones who became part of the machine. But what about the ones who said no, the ones who fought back? Could heroism be taught the same way cruelty had been? In 2010, Zimbardo founded the Heroic Imagination Project, a program designed to train ordinary people to resist corrupt systems, to stand up when no one else will. It wasn't about superhuman bravery. It wasn't about movie-style heroics. It was about one simple truth: that heroism is a choice, a muscle that can be trained. Because just as a system can turn good people evil, it can also turn ordinary people into heroes. Zimbardo's message had changed. The man who once exposed how fragile morality was now wanted to prove something else. That power doesn't belong to the system, it belongs to the people inside it. The whistleblower who refuses to stay silent. The bystander who steps in instead of looking away. The soldier who disobeys an inhumane order. These are not exceptions. They are not anomalies. They are proof that resistance is possible, that heroism can be built the same way cruelty can. Because if the Lucifer Effect showed how good people could turn evil, then maybe it could also show how ordinary people could become extraordinary. Zimbardo had spent his life proving that people could be corrupted, but in the end, he realized something just as important, that we are not powerless, that no system, no institution, no authority can take away the ability to choose. And in the moment when it matters most, when the pressure is on, and the world expects silence, that's when a hero is made.